And let me tell all these people they can come inside now.
Oh, by the way, Katrina, I forgot to tell you, I'm actually moving to New York this fall. So I'm going to be part of
Oh,
the
you
National
are?
New York. Yeah, I get to join Alice
Awesome.
and all the crazy New York founders.
Awesome. I'll be in New York more. So that's exciting. Yeah, I'll catch up with you when I'm there in the fall.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. All right, I am going to go ahead and get our conversation started because I'm just very excited about our guest today. So this is Jake. Jake and I met a year ago in Austin. He was in the Sputnik Accelerator. Jake, you're based in currently Baltimore, correct?
The Philadelphia area.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Philly. So Jake is an incredible founder. I love his product, and he has just had he's had an incredible journey. And so I just wanted to bring him on to share more personally and share the story of what that journey looks like and just have an open conversation. So anyway, Jake, I'm just gonna, go ahead and take the floor. All yours.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, everyone. I guess it's relatively early. I don't know, maybe it's like 9 a.m., right? In Texas or Central Time. So thank you for having me, Katrina. Katrina and I go way back. Almost a year ago, we met in Austin at some random burger joint that I was telling her about. And it's kind of rare because when I first met her, I'm like, oh my God, you're Filipino, because there's like no Filipinos in this industry at all. So that was my first reaction when I saw her. But thanks for having me, everyone. So I'm just going to share a bit about my story. And I think since we're all founders here, I'm going to skip the part about, the origin story of me, usually the sales pitch, and go straight into kind of what was like being a founder of, a food and beverage startup and to where we are today. And, I was saying, Katrina, I'm pretty good at impression, but there's always a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know. And my hope is that we can just have an open discussion. And I'd love to hear any questions and hear your story about some of the challenges that you're facing as, women founders, BIPOC founders, and there's just a lot of stuff going on out there in the market right now. But I'll start off the bat by saying, I'm a first generation Filipino American immigrant. And my opening joke is that I was born in the Philippines and raised in the exotic land of New Jersey. But as Katrina knows, in Filipino families, food has always been part of the center of our family. Yeah. So my earliest memories has been just helping my mom, my grandmother, make Filipino delicacies in our kitchen because we were an immigrant family. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. So any kind of revenue coming into the family was always a huge help. So from like that age onward, it's like this idea of food equals love, food equals hard work was always kind of ingrained in my mind, like in my DNA. So, life is always ironic because I end up working for these big food companies as a career anyway. So I worked for companies like Procter and Gamble when they had brands like Pringles and Iams and Nuka Pet Foods. And most recently, I was with Starbucks, where I was working on product innovation, strategy, and white space. But with many entrepreneurs, and like I'm sure all of you all had the same kind of, itch or bug inside you. It's like, hey, I love what I'm doing, but I've always wanted to do my own thing. In my case, I love brand building, I love food, but I was a creator. I love to create something. So, I left corporate behind, and then, I started my first startup. So this is not my first startup at Manila. My first startup was actually a refrigerated almond milk brand. It was called Origin Almond. And I basically started that with $500, a table at my local farmer's market. And then, I grew that from distribution from the farmer's market to Whole Foods to Walmart to Kroger. Long story short, we were doing pretty well. March of 2020 was our highest revenue month to date because we were selling in all these great distribution points. But obviously around that time of the U.S. history, that's when COVID kind of hit us. So, since so much of our revenue was tied to in-store traffic, we saw about an 80% revenue decline in 6 weeks during that lockdown period. So it was obviously a terrible period, not just for my business, but for the entire world. But I walk away from that with three things that just left me with gratitude. Number one is that we were a refrigerated business, so a lot of our inventory was closely monitored. We sold off everything. Number two, it's like I had friends and founders who had businesses 20 times larger than my own, and then they lost everything overnight. And number three, it's like I didn't get sick, my family didn't get sick, my friends didn't get sick during COVID. So you just have to look back, and like, it was a terrible time, but you just have to think, is like, how thankful was I during this period? And then the sake that I lost my almond milk business in relation to the world going through this terrible pain, it's okay. Like, things will be okay. So, I made that decision during that period to pivot away from that first startup. I guess it's a pivot. It's a pivot to a complete new brand and product. And that's how Philip Manila was born. And the story behind Philip Manila was pretty simple. I mean, during that lockdown, everyone was pretty depressed. I was just reading all these articles, and I came across this one article, and it talked about how some areas of the US, like 30% of the healthcare workforce on the front lines of COVID were Filipino. And like, this is a kind of mind blowing, and it's almost like an inside joke. It's like, in most Filipino families, we have at least 7 or 8 cousins or uncles or aunts who are nurses, who are
Jake,
doctors.
look, my whole family is just, when I didn't become a nurse or something in the medical field, they were just so disappointed. They still have no idea what I do.
Exactly. So
They're like, you're in
if
advertising, right? You're in advertising.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, when I was at P&G, I was at Procter & Gamble. I was a brand manager, and my mom didn't know what that was, so she thought I was a branch manager, like at a bank. Anyway, but it was an eye-opening insight about that Filipino thing, and then it made me do more research about our community, because I grew up as a Filipino American, but I wasn't really that close into knowing that much about our people. And it turns out the data shows we're a thing. We're the second largest Asian American group, the largest in 11 states, including California. A fun fact that I love to share: in California, Tagalog, our national language, is the third most spoken language outside of English and Spanish. But my mind goes to the shelves of the supermarket. That's my career. I'm like, wait a second. If we're such a big part of the community, why is it when I go to like the Targets, the Wegmans, the Krogers, the HEBs, the Publix of the world, there's actually no Filipino food on the shelf, right? You almost have to go to your local Asian grocery store in the dusty corner and find these MSG packets. And like, that's people's experience of Filipino food. And so, that was the inspiration of Philip Manila. So that was kind of like my new purpose. It's like, oh my God, this speaks to me as who I am as a person, my background, my family, and the drama I've been through with my first food startup, or refrigerated food startup, no doubt, no doubt about that. And so, that gave me the spark to grow Philip Manila. So the story goes is that, I took my $1,200 stimulus check, at that moment, and I invested that into building the first prototypes of Philip Manila. I like to joke that that stimulus check was the immigrant version of pre-revenue institutional funding, right? So it's like, no one's gonna give us money, so I gotta get money from somewhere. So Uncle Sam gave us the money, and then I bought some jars from Amazon. I rented a commercial kitchen for half a day to make my parents' recipes. I got some lids off of like some eBay thing, and I had a prototype, and I made the labels myself. So then I knew the buyers from my first startup, and then I emailed them like a few months after lockdowns, when they stopped pulling their hair out, and like, hey, remember me? I used to have those weird almond drinks. Now I have these Filipino sauces. I emailed one of the buyers from one of the most hardest regions to get into for Whole Foods, and then I get an email reply back in 30 minutes, and he goes, Jake, we've been waiting for years for someone to do Filipino food. We'll take all the SKUs. And so, with that simple email, that gave me the distribution into that region. And then in fall of 2020, Philip Manila's MVP was officially launched. Yeah. So from then on, it was just using that traction, using that early capital just to build a story of velocity, and even launching into Amazon with their FBA services. And we became a #1 seller there. And then it's kind of the story of like slowly getting the traction, slowly getting the results in, obviously getting a lot of learnings from the consumers and from the public, and doing iterations to the point where, okay, it's been like about 9 months in. I have some success stories from Whole Foods. I have success stories from online and Amazon and direct consumer. So now I need to raise some money. And then, I know for a fact, all of y'all are going through this right now. It's not easy to raise money. I mean, your early stage food brand, on top of that, all the factors of being minority owned, female owned, it's just kind of like the cards are not in our favor. But fortunately, I found a great accelerator that Katrina had mentioned earlier called Sputnik ATX. And they actually are they're a tech accelerator. So they do weird things like, I don't know, like apps and med tech and insurance tech. And so I pitched them. They're like, hey, I'm doing Filipino food. And they're like, oh, I don't know. But it turns out one of the managing directors of Sputnik, his son did spend a lot of time in the Philippines. And so he was very familiar with Filipino culture and Filipino food. And it was kind of like one of my lessons in fundraising is that ultimately he said yes. And that's how I got into the accelerator that gave us the initial, pre-seed funding to build the company. But one of the lessons I learned from that is that there's actually a lot of capital out there. I think the thing that I've learned personally is that the tricky thing as founders, or the work as founders, is finding those individuals that believe in you and your mission and that have that capital, rather than approaching the usual suspects and pitching them on your stuff. I'll give you a good example. So, at that point, I probably pitched my deck to probably 100 VCs, angel investors, and so forth. 100 of them said no. The usual process was like, hey, Filipinos, big population, no representation in CPG. And they're like, oh, I don't know, it seems niche. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I went golfing in the Philippines once. The food wasn't that great. I was like, oh, send some jars to my wife. Maybe she'll try it out. Or, it's like, it's kind of like this thing that you just have to go through so many levels and so many barriers to bust for them to get the idea, right? So my pitch deck back then was so, it's embarrassing. It was like, I'm Filipino. The Philippines is a country in Asia. These are sauces. It's like, so like, what the heck? So then when I pitched the people that actually believed in us, it had some relation to the community. They're like, oh my God, yeah, I totally get it. Filipino food is a thing. How much do you need? So it's a completely different conversation when you find those investors that kind of believe in you and understand what you're doing, rather than kind of like going on a blanket kind of strategy and just finding these VCs with all this money, they'll just say no to you. But anyway, so, I got the money from Sputnik. I spent some time in Austin. And then from then on, I was able to build that traction distribution. We launched another region of Whole Foods, and then to where we are today. So, I'm going to cut the story short with some of the top line traction so far. But, right now we're about 1,000 distribution points. We launched with Fresh Time, World Market, Whole Foods, Amazon. We recently launched nationwide with Sprouts. And then this fall, we will be the first Filipino product that Target has ever launched in their stores. We subscribe to SPINS data, and according to SPINS data, Philip Manila has been able to prove two things. The first thing is that Filipino is the fastest growing Asian cuisine in the US. When I say fastest growing, it's 287% growth versus the nearest, which is Korean at 20% growth. And number two is that Philip Manila is leading all that growth. We have 80% market share in the fastest growing category in the US. So we have the privilege and we have the blessing to be a pioneer and ultimately the category in this emerging trend in the US. But traction aside, what makes us most excited is that we're finally adding that representation, which our mission is all about. And then, lastly, we are kind of like, we see all these comments in social media about, usually from folks who are Filipino, and they're like, thank you, Kuya. Kuya means older brother in Tagalog. They're like, thank you, Kuya, for doing Filipino food right. They don't have to be embarrassed about their cuisine. They don't have to be embarrassed about their culture. We are no longer Asian inspired. We're no longer Asian cuisine. We're Filipino. We're wonderfully different. We're definitely unique and we're quirky. And, I think every culture in AAPI has their right to shine in their own spotlight. So the journey is just beginning. I know I might probably make it sound super easy, but that's our job as founders. But I'd love to hear any questions about our journey. If there's anything that you're wondering, I'm sure I have made the same mistakes you're going through now, if not the ones you're going to make in the future. So I'd love to share any tidbits of advice if I could.
Thanks, Jake. Okay, sorry, my dogs have decided to fight in my office also, so sorry about that. Yeah, I want to get into the dirty stuff, I want to get into the pain and suffering, because one of the things that's really important to me as we have, as we operate programs like this, is there's already enough out there about how easy it is to succeed, all the media pieces, right? It's like, it makes you draw this straight line to the success that that person or that brand might be experiencing, but that's obviously not true. So you were talking about, for example, being embarrassed about your pitch deck. So let's go back to that, to that time frame when you were just getting started. What with an ethnic product, with a product that's different, with a product that you felt like needed explanation, what was that journey for you like, and how did you get to that point where the messaging resonated, right? So what experiences did you have that helped you craft that? What feedback did you get, and who did you talk to?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Katrina. I think the lesson that I learned was that, I'm a marketer by trade, right? So one of the things I taught myself during that whole crafting the story and pitch deck process was that no one really cares about the details, right? As marketers, as founders, we get so excited about this is a story, this is the product, this is what makes it exciting. And then we want to put everything into our deck and into our story. And our hopes is that our personal passion and our personal story gets transplanted into the mind of the viewer, like in the mind of the investor, in the mind of the retailer. I think, it's always important to realize to know your audience, and your audience, in this case, the investor, they probably come across 20 or 30 pitch decks a day, right? So if you think about what they're going through, they probably scan, we use DocSend, and so we know the tracking of what slides they see. So after the first, second, and third slide, they usually blank out. So if you're not able to get your message in the first, second, or third slide, you're not successful in getting your story across, and you're not successful in getting to this next round. So it took me this, I told you I pitched about 100 VCs and angels, 100 iterations. I mean, if you think about that, so after every pitch, after every failed attempt, I looked back at the deck. Some of them gave me feedback, and then I took all the feedback. I took what I learned from each of the pitches, and then I made small tweaks to the PowerPoint. I moved this slide up, I removed this slide, I took off one sentence from the slide, and it kind of distilled after kind of like PowerPoint version, 105, into more of a powerful message that was very impactful, that got you to the next level where you needed to in terms of an investor. Yeah. So if I were just to summarize that, as you're all doing your pitch decks and you're thinking about how to tell your story, the full transparency of the industry is that, your story, your vision, your mission is powerful. But if you're talking about sending a cold pitch deck, talk about the opportunity and talk about what makes your brand or product ready to tap into that. Yeah. So I could share my pitch deck maybe as if it's helpful, but one of the things that I've learned is that I put this really powerful chart on the first slide, and that powerful chart kind of opens the door for interest into the next few slides for the investor to read. So I think every deck that I've seen that's been impactful has one kind of business chart or kind of this key message chart that kind of states the urgency and the huge opportunity that your business represents.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I know I've said it here in our meetings a million times, but data helps you tell your story, right? And you have free access to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about identifying investors that resonated with your story, that understood you. How did you find those people, right? Like it's something, one of the examples that you gave, it's not necessarily super transparent that this person had a son that spent a lot of time in the Philippines, right? So how did you go about finding people that aligned with the values that would get excited about the brand?
So a lot of it is networking. A lot of it is luck. A lot of it is, just being at the right place at the right time, and kind of having that perseverance and that preparedness turn that luck into something that becomes a fruit. Yeah. So, I gave that example of Sputnik, and, one of the investors there happened to have a son who was familiar with the Philippines. And so that was total luck. Like, who on earth? I didn't even know about that when I went to Austin to interview with them. And so that worked in my favor. So from then on, I met all the investors at that VC. I met other folks and mentors and founders. And, the interesting thing about our story is that, like I said, Filipinos are the second largest Asian American group. There's about 5 million of us. So interestingly enough, like this network of people I met in Austin, they knew someone who was Filipino. They knew, oh my God, like one of the investors I know, he's married to a Filipina, right? Or it's like, oh my gosh, like you should meet this lady. She's from one of these VCs. She's half Filipino. And so it's kind of that building that network and that familiarity, and people know your story. They think about you top of mind whenever a certain topic comes up. And that's how you get those windows and doors open to make your inroads for fundraising and networking. Yeah.
So what you're kind of talking about is you tapped into investors that were, they were either, people of color, very familiar with that culture. So kind of, adjacent to that, right? I guess, tell us about your experience just your general experience fundraising and being a person of color, having an ethnic product. What lessons have you learned there, good and bad?
Yeah. I think right off the bat is that I will share with you, candidly, that as a founder, fundraising was my most hated part about being an entrepreneur and founder. I told you I come from an immigrant background. And so the idea of asking people for money was so painful. When I was an undergrad, I worked 3 jobs to pull myself through school without asking my parents for money. I was a friggin' tour guide. I worked at the bookstore and I was a resident assistant. So the fact that I have to come to these rich people and ask them for money to grow a business was super different than what I grew up in, what I did it. That said, I've learned an appreciation for it. It's almost become a bit of a game. And so it's almost this idea that take something that you really dislike and don't like and try to be good at it. And so one thing I've learned is that the tips that I shared with you about finding your tribe, finding those people with capital that are connected to your community and believe in you, that's probably the most effective in the early stages of fundraising. So if I were to give you an example, if you're raising $100,000, if you could find those folks to kind of put in the first 50% of that, that is 80% of the battle. Yeah. So once you hit that milestone of like 50, 60%, the rest of it's relatively easy because then you get a FOMO effect, the fear of missing out. So then you can go to all the investors that turned you down, like, hey, remember me? So we have about 60% of our round filled. These are all our VCs backing us. These are all the angels backing us. We're about to close it. Do you want to get in? Magically, you'll find the people that rejected you are starting to have second thoughts and trying to reevaluate who you are as a brand, and then they may come back. And that's exactly what happened to us. So, we're about 70% of our way to closing a round. And then I approach the same investors that declined me in the beginning. I'm like, hey, Sputnik's behind us. We have this VC behind us. We have this angel behind us. Used to be managing director of one of the largest CPG VCs. Do you want in? It's like, yeah, we'll do it. And then that's how I close my round. So it's funny, if I were to make a chart that shows you the amount of the round close over time, it would look something like this, right? It's like you make it first, the first hump of trying to get your first 50, 60%, and then the last 40% or so will come much, much faster than you would expect. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'd like to just kind of talk through some of the big moments that you've had that have really propelled your growth.
Yeah.
What have those moments been for you in the last 18 months?
Yeah, so I mean, there were
obviously winning Pitch Slam. Yeah, that one's a big one.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, so we won the Pitch Slam at Expo East last year, and that was huge. That was definitely a validation that the fact that a weirdo Filipino food startup can win a Pitch Slam at one of the largest food shows in the world was just so humbling, right? Also the fact that we were able to close our round. I mean, that was an eye opener for me. I was like, what on earth just happened? And just getting some distribution deals like with Fresh Time, with World Market, even with Sprouts, those were eye-opening as well. But the interesting thing to kind of note from that experience, Katrina and the rest of y'all, is that there are lots of victories and obviously lots of defeats and heartbreaks that we go through as founders. One thing I learned is that take all these victories and put it as part of your story, right? It kind of like you're building imagine this traction snowball, and every one of these things that happens to you in a good way, it gets bigger and bigger, so that you're armed with all this amazing accolades and traction and distribution. And that way, whatever opportunities are ahead of you, it gets so much easier to win. Yeah. So, I told you I won Pitch Slam. And so the way that it's on paper is that, Jake Filomanillo won Expo East Pitch Slam. That's pretty cool. He gets a booth next year, he gets some stuff. But the way that you spin it, the way that you market it as founders is that, oh my God, can you imagine this Filipino food startup won one of the largest Pitch Slams in the natural food industry world? And it just shows you, it's another proof of fact that Filipino is on the verge of blowing up. So you tell that to investors like, oh my God, I got to get into this. So it's kind of like crafting that story without all these small wins and kind of building that traction to something that makes it a packageable win when you approach some of the larger retailers and investors, if that makes sense. So, but that's kind of the marketing muscle that all of us are continuing to build and flex.
Yeah. So I was that year for Expo, I was a mentor for Pitch Slam. And I'll tell you that behind the scenes, when we reviewed, I don't even know how many applications. And when we got to the semifinals, And then when it was down to kind of, we had to choose our top 2 or 3 brands that we wanted to go be a mentor for. And literally every single mentor was fighting over you. I don't know if you know that, but it got ugly behind the scenes. And part of me was like, I'm Filipino, I get to do it.
That's what I thought, because I got
They
partnered
didn't
with
let me.
Kirk.
No.
Kirk Visola. He's like, I love Kirk. He's so funny. We just laughed at all of our like meetings. We didn't even talk about the pitch slam. I'm like, Kirk, don't get me wrong. I don't know why they didn't pair me with Katrina. She's Filipino. He's like, I don't know either.
Well, and one thing I also, part of the reason why I'm saying this in this meeting is because when you are out there as founders, you may not realize that the community is watching you. The community is watching how much you're investing in yourself. The community is watching how you're following up. The community is watching how you're showing up. And it matters. And so I'll tell you that even now, Jake has had, some lots of traction, successes. But in those early days, one of the things that I heard a lot about Jake, not from Jake, but from people that Jake probably didn't even know, and Jake probably didn't know they were watching him, is that Jake always shows up with a smile. Jake has great energy. You can tell that Jake is coachable. He is willing to do the hard stuff. And so those are the things also when you're out there, how you show up, even, and like, Jake, you said earlier, you're really good at the impression, right? Like you never stop telling your story. You never stop putting your best foot forward. Doesn't matter that behind the scenes there might be a dumpster fire, because like you said, as a founder, your job is to sell the dream while asking for help, right? That's a really important component. I think that founders sometimes don't realize is that the community is watching, people are watching, and investors, they also talk. So for example, Jake, when an investor saw your pitch deck again and they noticed that you took their feedback, I promise you that if someone asked that investor, hey, what do you think of this company? Even if that investor passed on you, they'll tell that other investor, oh, you know what? I passed on that because it wasn't a good fit at the time, but I might invest now or soon. And he also took the feedback that I gave him and did something with it. And so all of these people do talk. So that is just a really, really important sort of undercurrent that as founders that I really, want to make sure that you all aren't losing sight of. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here. So let's open it up for questions. I'm sure you guys have questions. So do you want me to start picking on y'all? Who wants to go first?
I have a question. Yeah, I loved your story. Thanks so much for coming on. Katrina always picks really cool, inspiring founders on Friday. So I appreciate it. I had a question about how you stay in touch with investors who said no. I've heard different things about, like, I've not done a great job of this myself, but like staying in touch with them, like, did you just ask them for money once the round is almost over? Or are there other ways to, I'm not great at this networking thing, but like to keep them in the loop with traction? Yeah, just a question on that.
Yeah, so it's a good question, Connie. Connie, what are you building, by the way? What's your brand?
Oh, it's a menstrual product. It's called Horology. It's a reusable product. So it's kind of non-toxic, good for the body, and also good for the planet as well.
Ooh, cool. So to answer your question, so everyone has their own tracking system. I made a spreadsheet of like VCs, angel investors that I emailed and pitch. And I kind of like have this weird tracking way if they said, 99% no, no. And then there's maybe, and yes. For the folks that say no, you can kind of add notes. It's like, this is a hard no. Like they would never be interested in Phil Manila, right? Or this is a no because we're way too early. Or this is a no because, they're not familiar with the category yet, but they're still interested in the business. They want to see where we go. So depending on how you categorize those results, and then I keep a mental track of how to kind of engage with these investors. So these days, I basically just kind of keep them CC'd into our quarterly investor updates. So even though they haven't invested money, I keep them posted about what's happening with the business on a quarterly basis. So I think that's a kind of a good frequency, because I feel like anything more than that, it's kind of like, it's like another email from Jake. But anything less than that, they're going to forget about you, right? So quarterly is also good. And also if you happen to have these amazing mind-blowing announcements, like for example, Connie, if you're launching nationwide in Target, by all means, that's worth an email to the investors that pass on, right? So just be mindful. And I would say every time you follow up with an investor, pair it with some news. Don't say, hey, this is, Connie, just following up. What do you think? It's like, hey, I know you're busy, but I just want to let you know that we're launching in 500 Target stores. Do you still want to get on this round? So there's kind of a meaning behind your follow-up rather than another email that the investor just presses delete on. Do you know what I mean?
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thank you.
Jake, on those investor emails, what's your subject line?
Oh, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. It's like, Phila Manila Q2 investor update, but depending on who the investor is, if they're familiar with me, I just use that same, subject. But if it's a new investor that I want to get their attention, then I kind of twerk. Is it twerk? Tweak. I do twerk. I twerk the email subject to say something like Phila Manila, #1 Filipino brand in the fastest growing category. Do you know what I mean? It's something kitschy like that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. All right, who's got another question? You guys feeling shy this morning? Hey, Sweeney.
I have a question. Hi, Jake. Thanks so much for your insights and your openness and your honesty and energy. Katrina, you're right. You have so much energy. I love it. It's really enlightening and it does help. As entrepreneurs, so just a big backstory. My name is Sweeney. I'm in Austin, Texas, and I run and operate a source to cup beverage company focused on teas and also coffee. And it's primarily like Indian origin ingredients. I'm curious to learn a little bit about your points in which you decided to fundraise. If you can speak a little bit about your journey and at what point you decided to go raise money.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, sweetie, what was the name of your brand?
I didn't say it. Good question.
Oh,
Sessa.
okay. How do you spell that?
Sessa, S-E-S-A.
Okay. That is a very popular space right now. One of my good friends, he actually lives in my development. He launched a brand called Half Day Tea. And they are like crushing it right now, like crazy growth. And he's an amazing founder as well. This is his second startup,
Cool.
His first one. But anyway, I'm
Half
getting
Day
off track.
Tea, is that right?
Half Day Tea.
Okay.
Check it out. It's phenomenal. My only regret is not investing in him. When he came to me a year ago. I could have retired by now. But to answer your question, Sweeney, is that the question is like, when is the right time to fundraise, or is bootstrapping a better thing, or is whatever else kind of option there is. It all depends upon the founder and your strategy and your vision, right? So I think the unique thing about Phila Manila is that we were essentially the first mover in an untapped marketplace, right? I mean, we were essentially trying to build the Filipino American food category in the US. Yeah. So the way I look at it, and based on my experience from corporate and even my first startup, it's that you need to move pretty fast, and you need to move strategically as well with how you expand the brand, because if you were to able to prove the concept well, it's very easy for any competitor to kind of enter the marketplace. So one of our competitive advantages at Phila Manila are two things. One is distribution, and the second thing is product innovation. So in order to fuel those 2 points of differentiation, we needed capital. And so that for us, that was kind of like the impetus to raise VC funding. Yeah. So I myself, like I'm a founder. I had my first startup. I don't have the money. It's like during COVID, my parents, my family didn't have the money. We don't come from that part of the ecosystem. And so, the banks are not going to give you money. So then like for us, it's like fundraising was the only choice. Yeah. And so far, I have no complaints. All the investors that we partnered with have all been value add. And I mean, it's kind of hard to complain when they're investing in you at a certain valuation, which by all means is pretty crazy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
So did you have a proof of concept before you raised funding? Or did you already have traction before you started to fundraise?
Yeah. So if you recall, my traction at that point when I raised my first money from that VC in Austin was that we launched in Whole Foods. We had the data to prove that there was a category, and then also we had the pathway. It's like, hey, in 3 to 6 months we have deals to go in these retailers and these distributors. So For that was like a good story on traction in order to get that funding. And once you get that funding, remember, you're using that funding, you're getting that distribution views to build that traction snowball even larger. And that's how we kind of like moved on from that point.
Got it. Sounds good. So you just self-finance essentially until you got to that point.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I used my $1,200 stimulus check. One thing also is that we had an EIDL loan from the government. EIDL was an economic impact development loan. And that was like $25,000, but we're talking about free money. It's like, I don't know what it was, like a 4% interest rate or 25 years. So it's like, if the government's throwing money at you, you take it. So.
Awesome.
Quick question.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Okay.
I'd love to build on something that, you know, what Aswini just asked. You were talking about how all of your investors are value add.
Yeah.
So when you were talking to the investors to potentially invest in you, what were the conversations like? What did you ask them to kind of determine whether they were going to be a value add?
Yeah. So, I mean, all the investors are value add. I mean, some are more value add than others. Yeah. So usually, you know, when I talk to them, you know, not all of the investors were super familiar with the quirks of CPG and natural foods and, you know, food distribution and stuff, right? So most of the investors at our cap table all come from tech. That said, you know, the value that they offer is obviously kind of the back end stuff for our direct to consumer channel, the Amazon part. But honestly, Katrina and team, their biggest value add is that they knew people with money. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, if their value add is introducing you to other people with money, I'll take that value add in the early stages, no doubt about that. That said, a lot of other investors come from CPG. So one of our investors, she used to be the managing director of Circle Up. She happens to be half Filipino. So, you know, she's my first go-to person asking about investment advice. And it's like, she knows everything. She's one of the smartest people I know. Another one of our investors is, oh, you probably know her. She is the founder of Fly by Jing. She's one of our angel investors. So she went through her own journey of building this amazing specific cuisine focused brand. And so she went through some of the same hurdles and the same challenges I went through. And so she's able to say, oh my God, Jake, yeah, don't work with that dude. Like, oh, Jake, you know, don't work with that retailer. Oh, try this, Jake. And so, you know, she invested money at the same time. The input and the advice from Jing has just been invaluable so far.
Thanks for that. All right, who's next?
Yeah, so I'll ask a question. So my name is Liliana, and I have a business where I sell fermented plant-based dips. It's called Pachamama Fermented Foods. And in talking about raising capital, my question is this. I've been trying to understand like what kind of exchange you want to make in the early stages. Like you don't want to raise too early, but then also like you're saying, when you need the capital there, what it typically looks like in structuring those types of like percentages with equity and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a good question. Liliana, how do you spell your brand again?
Pachamama. So it's Pachamama. Fermented foods. Yeah.
Got it. It's a pretty cool space. I met a few founders that are doing similar kind of these ideas of savory fermented dips. So pretty exciting space as well.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, it's I think in terms of the vehicle, as in like, you know, the nitty gritty, like the documents, I always recommend using a safe or convertible notes, because in these early stages, it's always hard to determine valuation, right? Because valuation is almost like more of an art than it is a science. So one quick tip is just to do a Google search for Y Combinator Safe. Yeah, and that'll just give you kind of like a legal ready document that you can kind of bring to investors for them to invest your money in as a legal agreement. In terms of valuation, it's hard to say. I mean, it's up to the founder to propose a valuation, then back it up with their own proof. So for us, I think our first round, we did a 5 million post money, which means that, you know, it's a safe note. There's no valuation, but it caps off at once the company converts to a 5 million valuation or higher. Yeah, that was what we chose. You know, for us, it was like the 5 million was because we had this traction, we had this white space, we had some of these other investors behind us, obviously the founder and, you know, my experience in CPG, and that kind of builds into that valuation. For the most part, a lot of the investors, angel investors, they kind of are familiar with those range of valuations. There's not going to be any questions asked. I mean, if you run into an investor, an angel investor is like, I don't know, give me $1 million value. I mean, like, save your energy and time and move on to the next investor where you don't have to fight that battle, right? Like I said earlier in the call, there's a lot of capital out there, Liliana, and just find the people that believe in you. They're not going to kind of nickel and dime you over valuation because it's, they're betting on you at this point, right? They're not betting on the dip. They're betting on Liliana, whether or not she could build something amazing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, you have 20 minutes. How about Shubra? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a great story. It's an incredible story, but it also, in some ways, makes you feel like is serendipity then the biggest factor in being successful, in business? Because your story kind of reads like it's these pieces of luck that sort of, presented themselves, at different points in your journey, and that allowed you to kind of scale in the way that you did. And if I compare it to sort of my journey, I feel like it's so fragmented, and it feels almost like I am not aligned with it. So at what point do you say like, okay, there is no alignment? Do I need to move on, right? So for example, you had another brand before this. At what point did you think like, okay, because of COVID, things are not working out, I'm going to close this out, right? So, I mean, COVID was not going to be here, well, it might just be here forever, but in different ways, right? So why close it out and not sort of figure out another way to keep continuing with that brand and instead of launching something new, right? So that is another question for me. It's like, for me, it's also like, okay, do I need to close this out and then move on to something else to see if I'm aligned there, right? How much do you belabor with one thing that, clearly is not functioning in the way that you would desire it to? I mean, there's a certain desire that you want it to be successful, and then there are certain facts that sort of show you that it's not successful. So how do you kind of manage those?
Yeah, thank you, Shubra. I mean, I love these fully open, transparent questions. Can I ask what brand you're building?
Yes, so I have an ingredient and science-based organic hair care that is good for the body. So we have a product called KeHe Hair and Scalp Booster that has only 4 organic ingredients in it that just gives you like stronger, healthier hair. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to answer, well, thank you. I want to answer your first question. So like I said, I think as founders, a lot of what we say, it sounds easy, right? Our journey sounds easy. And I sell it with a big smile. I think, I think, the part that's not truly obvious yet is that there was a lot of opportunities of circumstance and luck. Yeah. So the important thing to realize that luck only translates into success if you pair it with preparation and work. Yeah. So, the fact that, I got the Whole Foods buyer to say yes to my prototypes, that's luck. The fact that I was able to spend the next 2 months working with a co-packer, getting all the ducks in a row, getting some initial financing for that, that's preparation and that's work. So if the buyer says yes, that's awesome. If you're not able to fill that buyer's needs and you're not able to get those products to fly off the shelf, that instance of luck turns into failure. So for Team Phila Manila, we think about the back end work that had to happen. Once the buyer said, yes, we'll take all the sauces, we're going to launch this fall. So all the production, all the manufacturing, all the regulatory work, once it's on shelf, that's 70% of the battle. So it's us kind of doing a demo with no food. It's literally me standing at the shelf talking about Phila Manila with a mask on. And every single jar that kind of comes out of that was one velocity jar for that store. And every 10, 20, 30 in a day, that's success. So a lot of it's hard work. I know I make it sound easy where it's like, oh, I got lucky. I bumped into this investor, he gave me $100,000. But there's a lot of work involved that comes in preparation for that. And there's a lot of work that comes after the fact to ensure that's a success afterwards. Yeah. So, but I hope that answers your first question. The second question is like, in essence, is it when to call it quits or when to pivot? Yeah. So I think in our case for my first startup, which was called Origin Almond, it was a tricky scenario because you have to remember, the decision to fold the business came in April of 2020. So April 2020, if I'm sure you all remember, that was when we were all watching our TVs. We all thought we were going to die. We didn't know what was going to happen to the economy if it was ever going to reopen after COVID and how that economy would change. So in my mind, it's like, okay, I have this refrigerated almond milk beverage business. Like all the buyers are not replying to any emails because everyone's kind of focused on keeping existing stock in stores. No one wants to talk about new products. I could go either like stay the course, but I need money because we have like manufacturing, we have people on staff. Should I raise $2 million because investors are not going to give out any money during COVID? Should I take out a $2 million loan? It's like, what do I need to do? So for me, it's like there was so much cons about continuing the business given the uncertainty what was going to happen post-COVID versus kind of like balancing it out with the benefits and the opportunity of maybe starting this new thing from scratch during this downturn when everyone else is kind of staying indoors. And I just chose the latter. I felt it was right at that moment. I mean, obviously there are other factors happening in the industry as well, like the consolidation of a lot of these refrigerated brands happening. The expense of operating in cold chain beverage was really crazy as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors. I mean, like, I obviously don't regret it. I mean, I wear that badge of failure with pride because what I learned from that first business is benefiting me now in Philly, Manila.
I sort of have a follow-up question. Would you say that your marketing background was probably the most critical piece of how successful you made, either of the two brands, more than luck, right? I mean, marketing is something that I struggle with, and I don't have that kind of a background. So would you say that?
Yes and no. I get asked this question a lot. I get asked like similar to what you were asking. It's like, Jake, you worked in these big CPG companies with food. That must have been a huge help when you're starting up, a startup. I would say yes and no. Yes, because it does give you some fundamentals on understanding like P&L, your cost of goods, some basic R&D work and product work. And yes, it helps with the investor story as well. That if you come from the industry, it helps people with the confidence to give you money. That said, the other side of it is the no. And no, because, as all of you have seen, starting a new brand, there's a lot of work involved. I mean, there's a lot of like elbow, kind of like dirty work and kind of getting your elbows dirty and stuff. It's like carrying boxes of stuff and like talking to buyers and getting rejected 9.9 times out of 10. And these are things that no corporate life will ever prepare you for. Yeah. So it's kind of having that combination of, I get that. I got the benefit of the corporate training, but then like, if you don't have that grit, if you're not willing to get your hands dirty and do that extra work and like embarrass yourself every day, I mean, you're not going to be successful. So, I mean, I hope that answers your question. I got to say, like, I met some other founders out there, like they had zero experience in CPG and they're doing so much better than I am. So you could also prove the point that CPG would also deter you from being a successful founder.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that question, Shubhra. Thank you.
Thank you.
Arby, you're not on mute. Or do you have a question?
Sure. I was going to see if anyone else. So, I mean, out of full transparency, I agree with what I forgot her name. I'm so sorry. I'm so bad with names, but she just spoke. Shubhra.
Yeah.
Shubhra I had just said, because like, I mean, as a founder, and I'm sure Jake, you would agree. We sometimes, as soon as we have a failure or something doesn't go the way we want it to, we get really broken because it's like our child and we want everything to be perfect. But I just think like we need to define perfect and we need to define the end goal. Like for me, for example, we worked really hard and we got into Sprouts, and then 3 weeks before launching, like Monday, Sprouts said, oh, we decided to go a different direction. And we have all these orders coming in now just for Sprouts. So, of course, it's just me and my husband doing this. And we stood there and we're like, what do we do now? But at the end of the day, I feel like, no failure is a true failure. And please, like, tell me what you think. you know, I could throw in the, you know, now in the towel and say, that's it, I'm done, I'm so frustrated. But I just feel like one person's no is not going to define who I am and the product and how hard I've worked for it. But again, I don't know, like, did you ever take these as signs, Jake? And were you like, well, clearly, you know, the signs are everywhere, you know, because as a founder, you can also be completely blinded by passion. So I just like your input there.
Yeah, thank you. How do you pronounce your name?
Sure, it's RP.
RP? Thank you, RP.
Okay.
And what are you building, by the way? What's your brand?
Sure. So it's a protein, it's called Body Bar. They're paleo bars, yeah. And I did it specifically for those who suffer with digestive disease, because I do, and I just felt like there's definitely a need with the growing people with IBD and IBS. So
yeah. Well, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, your question is super transparent, and the answer is yes. There are lots of moments where you question yourself as a founder. You question yourself as, you know, what are you doing? Yeah. So I probably had one of those moments every other day, you know, in my first startup, right? So my first startup, I was doing a podcast interview, and I told them the story. It's like we in the first few months of our launch of that almond milk thing, you know, we got to deal with some of the local Whole Foods. So we got like 5 Whole Foods in Mid-Atlantic, right? And you know, everyone was super excited. You see your stuff on the shelf. At like month number 2, I mean, things were not looking good. You know, our velocities were not good at all. Super embarrassing. I can tell you, there were some stores where it was like a negative velocity because someone was returning it. Can you imagine how embarrassing that is? And then so it was almost like the buyer was like, oh, Jake, I know I really want to make it work. But the writing was on the wall is that they were going to discontinue me after three months. They were going to pull me off the shelf. So it was like, I was super embarrassed because it's like, I know I left my cushy corporate job. Everyone is like, Jake, you could do this. And then like, you know, only to be hit with a brick wall of failure so early into your journey, right? It's like, what am I doing? I was like, at that point, I was thinking that now should I start drafting a letter to my old boss to ask for my job back? Is it too late for that? Like, it's like this idea of humiliation and this idea of failure was kind of like overwhelming. Yeah. You know, that said, you know, that next day I went to a different Whole Foods in that same region and I sold the product in, and the buyer loved it. The buyer of that local store gave me a PO that was larger than all the other 5 Whole Foods combined. And the product at that store was doing phenomenally well. And it was taught me a couple of things. Number one is that every day is a roller coaster for us as founders. I mean, we get like tons of bad news, we get some victories, but it's just a matter of how you process it. I think you're talking about, you know, how to channel those victories into something that you learn. So from that experience, I learned like what made our products do well in certain stores. I learned about kind of like how to market our products. And from then on, you know, at such a point where I was ready to throw in the towel, it actually energized me. It's like, you know, if I can do pretty well if I just kind of figure out what I'm doing right. And that gave me the fuel to kind of move on from that point on. But, you know, do I question myself now at Filipino? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, am I doing the right thing? Like, I'm working with other people's money as well. So I have to be mindful of the fact that people trusted in me with their money as well. So I think the long story short is that, and I'll be very frank with you all, it's like, nobody asked us to be founders. Yeah? So,
yeah.
And if it was an easy job, everyone would be a founder, but it's not an easy job. And I think one of the things that makes us who we are as founders is that resilience, is that perseverance. You know, when things get tough, that's where we have to be tougher. If we really believe in what we're doing, if we don't want to kind of throw in the towel yet, you just have to work through that trash and work through that hardship and kind of move on to the next thing. That said, you know, I don't know what everyone's personal journey is. You know, there is a certain point where it gets too much, then you have to reevaluate. But overall, it was never guaranteed to be easy.
Correct. Thanks, Jake.
I just want to touch on something that came to mind as you were talking, Jake. There's this idea of like what people perceive real entrepreneurs to look like, what good founders look like, right? And I think that part of being a founder is, even if you don't feel like it, you're kind of pretending to be one of those founders until you feel like you're one of those founders, or maybe you may never feel like one of those founders. But I think that also I just had a story told to me that was really disheartening. Someone had applied to an accelerator, and they basically told her they didn't take her seriously because she wasn't working on her startup full time. And basically what they told her in that moment was that she wasn't a real founder, and that they didn't believe in her because she didn't look like who they wanted her to look like, right? But coming from the background that she has, and she's also, being pragmatic. To me, what I told her was that you having a full-time job means you have the ability to fund your dreams using this job. And what these people are telling you is that they don't have your lived experience. And so they can't possibly relate to the choices that you make. So Jake, I'd love for you to just like touch on some of those experiences that you may have had when, if someone doesn't feel like, oh, are you a real founder? Right. Or, that's great that you have a background in CPG, but what do you know about X, Y, and Z? I think that those experiences also are both demotivating and motivating, depending on the day and depending on your mood. So I'd love for you to share a little bit of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I talk about openly with other founders of color and also with other VCs and even our own investors is this idea of pattern matching. And I think it's kind of this dangerous precedent that's happening right now in the world of investing. And for those of you who don't know, pattern matching is, hey, we had these founders that were really successful with their startup. They exited, they made all this money, and we should kind of invest in companies and founders that fit that pattern. Yeah. So if you look at founders, more often than not, the pattern is like, a white guy, graduate from like a good school, raise a ton of money early on, and that equates into success if you were to extrapolate it. And so when folks like maybe us come to these investors, we don't fit that pattern, and as a result, it's more often than not, it's a less chance for them to invest. Yeah, so that happens to me quite a lot. Obviously, I don't fit that profile for many reasons, but I think what we have to kind of remember is what I said earlier on is that if possible, you have to align yourselves and you have to seek out the folks with capital, the investors and the advisors that can just believe in you and that can relate to your community and can relate to your vision as well. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like 9.9 out of 10 investors I met were the folks that would just immediately dismiss me for whatever reason. But that 0.1% is all that you need to make a company successful.
Well, I'd just like for you to, we have a couple of minutes left. What's next for you? What are you working on now? What's coming up in the next year for Phil Manila?
Yeah, so times are tough, guys. I'm not sure if you know, but the US is kind of in an economic poop show right now. So I think now I would encourage all of you to relook at your product and your go-to-market strategies and see the best way to navigate a lot of the economic turmoil we're going to have in the next 24 months. Specifically, think about your end consumer in mind. Gone are the days where folks are willing to spend a premium on something cool and niche. I think we have to kind of factor in this idea of value. So for Phil Manila, I mean, it's not really top secret or anything. And for now, it's like, yeah, we're focused on innovation, but we're also focused on pivoting our products to meet this new normal. I mean, for us, that means right now we're operating with these glass jars, super expensive. We're going to transition to a pouch, and basically you move your form factor, you can get more gross margin, and you can provide a better end of price for the consumer. Yeah, so that in itself is a huge project. We're also launching a couple new lines of new product extensions as well as for condiments. We just launched a line of coconut and ube spreads, but there's a lot of growth happening in Phil Manila. But I think most importantly, it's like, be wary about some of the decisions you make in terms of manufacturing and distribution. Be choiceful who you partner with. I turned down Safeway Albertsons because they wanted a slotting fee. I'm like, guys, I don't know what you're seeing in the news right now, but no one has any money for your slotting fees. And so you should pick the retailers and pick the distributors that you want to work with that makes sense for your business instead of chasing growth, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's a very different world. I think Katrina knows, like maybe a year or two ago, like you had all these well-funded startups that are just spending millions and millions of dollars of growing their top line and forgetting about profitability. These days, you talk to any investor, they're going to ask you about your profitability plans, probably first and foremost.
I mean, there's no getting around it, right? The environment continues to shift underneath our feet. And yes, you are also in the hardest stage of your business. And so, that's great advice. So I really appreciate everyone being here, asking these questions. Jake, thank you so much for your transparency, your words of encouragement. I know that, sometimes when you're sharing your story and we're talking about the hard stuff, it's not always easy to do. So really appreciate that. And I will talk to all of you soon. Have a great
everyone.
weekend.
Thank you.
Good
Bye,
weekend.
Jake. Thanks, guys. Bye.